I was born in Egypt, Ohio. And I was born in February on a very cold winter day, and I was baptized the same day I was born. And I told Mom, I said, how did you do that? And she said, well, we told the priest the due date, we had the godparents lined up for the due date, and when you were born during the night, the next morning we called them, and you were baptized the same day. And Mom said, then we could rest easily. Should anything happen, everything would be fine. An act of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in our home, we had, Grandma lived with us. It actually was my dad's stepmother. She lived with us, and we're 5 children. I had 2 older brothers, a younger sister, and another younger brother. And I think we just lived the normal family life on a farm. Our family, we were living the aftermath of the Depression. So there were a lot of things that we would have liked to have had. We were very, very scrupulous about using everything till the hilt and not wasting anything. And of course, being on the farm, we never were without enough to eat. But there were other things we would have liked to have had. But our blessing was we had good diet, good food, right out of the garden, and plenty of work. I've been a sister 63 years. That's kind of many years.
When did you first consider a religious vocation for yourself?
I have often thought of that. Where did it come from? Why me? I do have relatives that they no longer are living that were religious. We had Sister Marina Burning, was my dad's first cousin. She was a Sister of the Precious Blood. And then right now I have Sister Martha Bertkey, who is a Sister of the Precious Blood, and I have Sister Anne Cecile Albers, who is a Hartwell Franciscan. So religious life is not something foreign to my family. I probably was about 4 years old, and we were visiting the shrine, at the relic shrine, and it was an extremely hot day, very hot day. And I remember I was so hot in that chapel, and the sisters were right next door, and they were likely praying the rosary. It was a back and forth prayer, and it sounded cool on the other side. And I wanted to go over there, but I knew Mom wouldn't let me because the door was shut. Never dreaming I would be on the other side someday. But I think my basic vocation started, and I say this with a smile, it's my mom's fault, because the Fathers of the Precious Blood, when I was in about the 6th grade, they went down to Chile. And they had the Messenger of the Precious Blood. It still is, they have their own messenger that they sent out, and we got this. And Mom and Dad knew some of those priests that had gone down to Chile, and each month there was a story about what they were doing. And I do not know why, but Mom, after supper, when we were finished eating, before we would get up from the table, she would read this story out loud. And I thought, wow, what a thing to be able to do. And I think that this was something that gave me the impulse to think about being a religious. And also I had sisters that taught me, and they talked about religious life. And so I went to high school in Dayton with the sisters, and this was one of the things that then as time went on, I felt that this was what I should do in life. The final discernment definitely was in the novitiate. We had, excuse me, we had a retreat when I was a canonical novice. And what I remember of that retreat, I think that was my real discernment, that this is what I am to do. And I went into my senior novice year with the goal that this is what I was going to do. When I told my dad, I very clearly remember the first time I even talked about being a sister was to my dad. I took piano lessons, and we were driving home from the piano lesson, and I thought I had to tell Dad that I wanted to go to the high school in Dayton with the sisters, and so I told him, and later he told me he about drove off the road. He about had a wreck because this is the last thing he ever dreamed I would do, because I was quite a tomboy. I wasn't I didn't give a lot of indications that I would make a good sister at that time, at least not in my dad's eyes. I surprised them very much. They never put anything in the way that I shouldn't do it. And I know that Dad talked to people, and I remember him saying one time that he had talked to someone at the Knights meeting, and that person had said, okay, if this is what she wants, God is leading her. And so I never had to struggle about having permission to go or that they didn't support me. I think the greatest blessings of religious life is the life of prayer. If we don't have prayer in our life, we don't get the support and the meaning and the understanding and the call that God gives us, and we follow that because of prayer and the adoration that we give God and thanksgiving. I think one of the ways I could say it the best is my most very favorite song is How Great Thou Art. And I love that song, and I often sing it. In fact, one morning I woke up and I was dreaming and I was singing How Great Thou Art. Had I had a family, I likely would have been a farmer's wife, and I think I would have been happy being a farmer's wife. I would have never dreamed of having gone to Chile. I would have never dreamed of being a bilingual woman, a bilingual nun. That was far beyond what I dreamed, and that I think those are some of the greatest things that happened that I would have never dreamt could happen had I not been a nun. I went to public school, but a two-room schoolhouse, but we had sisters teaching us in a public school. At that time, religious could teach in the public school. And in fact, I had no lay teacher until I went to college, because I went to the sisters' high school. So my first lay teachers weren't until I went to college. And my highest degree in education is education with a BS. My first thing that I do in the morning is I pray my office and my rosary, and I have time to spend in prayer. And this is part of being a religious. And in the evening I do the evening prayers, and I do them alone at this point in my life.
What does being a member of your community mean to you?
It means that I have a family that cares for me, cares about me, and a lot of things I wouldn't have been able to do had I not been a part of a community. It's the support that is needed, that I find necessary to continue working and doing what I'm doing because of needs and so on. I'm very grateful that I am living alone, because I do work with the Hispanics in the area, and it gives me the flexibility to not have to be dependent on doing my part of getting meals or being there at meals, because the people I work with mostly are from the restaurants. They start work at 9, they get off at 1 or 2, and then they go back to work again 2 hours later until 9:30 at night, and there's no time to be with them like normal people. You can't go to their homes in the evenings, they're at the restaurant working. And so I choose the lunchtime, the meal time. I go late, and then I eat, and I can sit there and we can talk before they leave on their break, and this is how I work with them. Well, the challenges in community is just the challenges of life. We all are ourselves. We all have different gifts. We all have different quirks, and to accept them among the members and love them as they are.
What are the joys?
The joys are just the fun of being with others and sharing and living and knowing who they are and what they're doing. The United States, in my mind, would not be what it is if there had been no religious. Because in the beginning, the need for orphanages, the need for hospitals, those needs were there. The sisters came forward and inaugurated them, and some of those hospitals still are in existence. And I think that they have, and in education, in our own community, when our sisters came to this area, the first thing that the people begged for was teach our children. And of course, in those years, if someone could read or write, they could be an educator because there was so much illiteracy. So I think education is one of the great things that the sisters have given to the nation. The war, in the Civil War, our sisters were out taking care of the wounded, doing what needs to be done. In our own community, the cholera epidemic created the need to have an orphanage. Before that, when there were orphans here and orphans there, the sisters took them in and gave them an education and reared them right in their own convent. But when there were so many, then they needed an orphanage. And so things created, just the way history, what was happening, created needs, and those needs were filled when they were seen, and this is how these things developed. I started out at 19 as teaching. I taught first and second grade. I had a double grade. Most of my life I taught in schools with double grades. And I often had taught music as well up into the 8th grade. In fact, I was 19 when I started teaching, and I was teaching 8th grade music. And they were like 14, 15 years old. And my greatest fear was that somebody would know how old I was. And if they knew I was only 5 years older than I might lose respect. That was one of my big fears in teaching the music to the upper grades. I did teach in Missouri. I taught in Wisconsin. I taught in Ohio. And when in 1968, I was asked whether I could go to Chile. And I had forgotten about the dream that I had as a child when my mother was reading to me about what was happening in Chile. And when I was asked whether I would go, I had no hesitation in saying, yes, I'll go to Chile. And of course, learning the language was one of the difficulties. And when I started there, I was teaching, I was educating, an educator. I was teaching English and doing music and science, teaching various things in the school. And then I was, after some time, I was asked whether I would be the pastor of a small parish, a little country parish in Los Bajos, in outside of Santiago. And I was pastor of that parish for a couple of years, and one of the most beautiful things that I have memories of is we had a couple that was married 80 years. And it was so special. We had the bishop come and have a mass for them, and both of them were in church. She was, I think, 99, and he was 100 and something. They had they had taken a kitchen chair and put little wheels on it, and they pushed him into the church, and she walked in. And when it was time for the bishop to renew their vows, their marriage vows, the bishop asked her whether she wanted to continue living with him for the rest of her life. And she says, "Claro, sure." That was her answer, and her voice was high-pitched and it rang through the church. And everybody was very amused. And then he asked him, and he said, "I want to die at the side of my wife." I felt that was one of the most beautiful wedding renewal vows that I heard ever and will ever hear. And another wonderful thing that happened, I had heard that in the parish there was a newborn baby and the baby was ill. So I was doing most of my work on a bicycle, and I went to the home, and as I got near the house, I could tell the neighbors were all talking, and they were all huddled together outside the house. and I knew something was wrong. I could just tell it. And so I came up to them, and they were discussing the situation of the baby. And they said that the baby, they had just now brought the baby home from the hospital. And they said that the doctors had said there was nothing wrong with the baby, that the baby was gluttonous, that it drank its milk too fast. My mind blew. I thought, how can a baby be gluttonous? And as we were talking, the baby vomited, and it was a spout coming out of the mouth, and I knew immediately what the problem was. So I told the family, I said, you must take that baby back to the hospital, because the baby's not going to live if you don't get that taken care of. And so, they were not going to do it. They must have been treated badly at the hospital. And they would not. And I said, well, if you don't want to take him back to the local hospital, I'll drive you and take you to Santiago, which was like about a 45-minute drive from Los Bajos. And they talked a little bit, and then they said, they said yes, they would take the baby to Santiago. But they refused my driving them, which I can understand. They had to stay overnight if they were going to Santiago. But they would take it. I made them promise 3 times that they would take it, because I wanted to make real sure that they were going to take this baby, because I knew the baby would not live. I didn't hear anything more about this, and a couple weeks later, there was a knock on the door, and I answered it, and here stood the parents with the baby. Without saying anything other than, they handed me the baby and said, this is your baby, because they knew. They had done surgery, and they fixed the problem for the child. And this, for me, still is a very loving moment when I think back. And then I wonder what happened to that baby. I don't know. I love teaching. I would have continued teaching had I not been asked to go to Chile. And I was asked whether I would go. And then when it was at one point, there were changes in work in Chile, so on, and I decided, and I realized it was time for me to come back home. I was there, I had worked there 12 years, so then I came back. Having come back, I couldn't go back into education. First of all, when I visited classrooms, they were starting with computers. I was teaching English. I was the only one with a textbook and wrote everything on the board, and the children wrote everything from the board into a notebook. And that was the education, how I was teaching English. And now computers, I had no idea what to do with them. My certificates had all run out. I had not renewed any because I wasn't in the States to renew them. So I knew education was something I couldn't do. And so they had my certificates all had expired. So then I looked at work in pastoral work, and I looked in parishes where there was a need for someone that spoke Spanish. I found a parish in Sandusky where a good percent of the people were Hispanic, and so I started pastoral ministry there. And from there I went to Adrian, Michigan, and that parish had 30% of the parish was Hispanic. And so I continued using my Spanish and working in the ministry with the Hispanics of those parishes. And then I came to Maria Stein at the shrine when there was a need for that as a slower pace work than pastoral work. My greatest joys were, I think, some of the stories that I shared in pastoral work and with my children. I simply enjoyed the children. I remember I was still in the black habit the first year I taught. And I had first and second grade. So the second year I taught, my first graders were in second grade, and we went into the gray habit. And the first day that it got cold and I wore a black cloak, we had a black cloak that we wore over the gray habit. And when I came on the playground with that black cloak on, one of my second graders stood in front of me with his arms on his hips, and he says to me, "Now, sister, you're not going to wear that again, are you?" And so I opened my cloak and I showed him the gray below it, and he was happy. We're diminishing in numbers, but I feel that there is a new life, and God is going to show us what to do. And the roles of religious might change drastically in the future that we might not even know of. They might be finding new things to do that we don't even know about what's happening yet. We don't know about what's out there for them to do. And I think they will always continue working with the poor. There will always be religious in education. That's going to be a factor that's going to continue. For example, our sisters in Dayton have started a literacy center for people that don't read. And our sisters are working with those people, and they're getting their high school education. And also the human trafficking and all of what's going on there, our sisters are going to be a part of it. We already are involved in doing, as the needs come forward, in what needs to be done there.
Would you recommend religious life today?
Yes.
Why?
It's an element of our faith life that has a great deal of importance in the church. It's the priests have their element, their area, and our sisters, the religious women, also have a very strong work to do in the church as such. So I feel, yes, there is a place for them.
Why do you stay? Why do you stay?
Why do I stay?
Mm-hmm.
Because when I had the hard times, and there were some times when there were difficulties, when I made my commitment with my first vows, I had to say that the vows were for 3 years, but between God and me, it was forever, and I have kept it.
What works of mercy are you most passionate about?
The poor, to give relief to the poor, to the immigrants and the people that have needs.
Why are you most passionate about that?
I think because of the background I've had, especially in Chile.
Imagine 5 women enter your religious institute. What are your hopes for them as they begin initial formation?
I would hope that they would have a sense of prayer, that they would also have a deep love for one another and for the community. And if they would enter our community, one of the challenges for them would be to be with aging people, aging women. What I still am hoping for is that I can be of value and help at the shrine where I'm still doing especially volunteering work. I enjoy very much being a tour guide, explaining the relics, and deepening the faith of people when they come to visit the shrine.
Imagine it is 2025. What do you hope the world has eradicated, such as poverty, illiteracy, starvation, or war?
I hope that the world would have eradicated prejudice and hate, and that there would be more acceptance of people as they are. I don't think I could have done the things in my life as I have done without the prayer, the support of prayer, and knowing that God walks with me as I do my activities.